ecologist and educator who's worked in the South Australian marine environment for 36 years. She's worked as a scientist for several government departments from 1990 to the early 2000s and established a sole trader consultancy in 2004, undertaking projects for NGOs, government agencies, and universities. Janine also works in marine education with schools, councils, libraries, EMS, and coastal community groups. Janine has qualifications and experience in both science and primary special education and is an adjunct academic with Flinders University. Janine has worked with the scuba diving community since 2007 and has managed multi-area and multi-participant marine citizen science projects since that time. The Marine Hitchhikers project, which we're all here to learn about tonight, started out as a small community grant with a group of local divers on the Yorke Peninsula in 2015. Since then, Marine Hitchhikers projects have been undertaken in Onkaparinga Council waters, Green Adelaide Metro Coastal waters, and Eastern and Southern Eyre Peninsula, the latter two of which are the subject of tonight's presentation. Janine highly values the contributions of marine and coastal communities in understanding the species composition, biogeography, and threats in the South Australian marine environment. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Janine. And I'll hand over to you.
Thank you to everybody who's joined this evening. I'm just going to share the screen now and cross my fingers. Thank you. Okay. Into my screen, onto the screen. And it should work now. Just checking, can you see this?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, thank you everybody who's joined us this evening, and thank you Alfie and Port Environment Centre for hosting this event this evening. I'd like to also thank Green Adelaide and Department of the Environment and Water for citizen science grants that have enabled these projects to occur over the past year and continuing into next year as well. So today we are going to have a little chat about marine hitchhikers, a term that some of you will have heard and some of you might not have. We're looking at what they are, how did they get to South Australia, and why does it matter if these hitchhikers are here? Some examples that are already here in the Gulfs, some hit list species, public enemy #1 type species to look out for, and then I will put the take-home message out there right from the start that all eyes in the water are very important, because we can all help to protect the marine environment from invasive species. So first question, what is this? And unfortunately, I cannot see the chat box, but I know someone there is going to say it's a crab, because it is. And a crab is a very good example of marine hitchhikers. This particular crab is the green crab, which European green crab, European shore crab, which we will have a look at a little bit later. But it's a good example of something that has been transported from where it originated to South Australia, where it now lives. And that's what marine hitchhikers are. They are brought into South Australia from locations where they are native and they are now not native in the new environment. So they may be invasive, in which case they could threaten human health or environmental or economic values, or they can be non-invasive. So there's quite a lot of non-invasive marine hitchhikers here in South Australia. We actually don't know what their impacts are, if any, on the marine environment. But some of the characteristics of marine hitchhikers that are very common are their competitive nature, because when they're in a new environment, just like the weeds in your garden, they might come from South Africa or somewhere else, they really thrive in this environment, and that they can compete for living space. In the case of marine hitchhikers, they can compete for food, or some of them may even eat native species. Those that are most significant in terms of biosecurity can carry diseases that impact native species. And just like land-based weeds, the weeds here in the sea can usually tolerate a variety of salinity, oxygen levels and temperatures, and exist in different habitats. So that enables them to have a broad spread. So as I mentioned before, may be invasive, non-invasive. So the invasive ones threaten human health or the environment or economic value. For coral, that those of you who go over to York Peninsula might be very familiar with. Okay, so other characteristics of marine hitchhikers. They grow fast. They can reproduce really easily. Some of them can just reproduce by breaking pieces off and growing from the piece. They often have high survival of young, and they can spread around quite easily. The other thing is they might contain toxic compounds, so they're not really eaten by predators. Here's an example of Caulerpa taxifolia, which arrived in South Australia in about 2002. It was a big concern at the time because it was thought that it would spread all the way down Gulf St Vincent. That hasn't happened. There has been a huge eradication efforts since that time to make sure that it is controlled, and so far it's staying around the Port River Barker Inlet system and West Lakes, and hasn't moved out into the marine environment. So some of these species also have toxic compounds that assist their survival. So how did marine hitchhikers get here? The number one source is shipping, and shipping is very, very important to South Australia, to our economy. And for as long as shipping has existed, species have been moved around the world from shipping. So I'm not going to talk too much about the information on this slide, other than to say we have a number of major ports. There's 3 of them that are listed here: Port Adelaide, Port Lincoln, and Whyalla Harbour and Ore Jetty, and they are very, very active with import and export. Other vectors, apart from shipping, boats, aquaculture equipment and stock, and live imports, which is less of an issue in the marine environment compared to freshwater species. So this is a good example of Port Adelaide being connected to the world. So you can see on here, unfortunately I don't have a little pointer, but it shows that from South Australia you've got a lot of exports coming out to all different parts of the world, a lot to Africa, a lot to Europe, Middle East, and all parts of Asia. Less so the Americas. Makes perfect sense. Why would you? And same with imports. So lots in the same area. So imports and exports mirror each other quite closely. And we're talking about millions of tonnes a year to up to 100 different countries. So very, very active ports in South Australia. This is just a little picture of the shipping traffic over the decades. It's getting busier and busier. You can see South Australia here, particularly on the 3rd map, and it shows some of the major shipping routes into and out of South Australia. So these ships are coming in and they're going out. And how are they bringing hitchhikers in? One of the number one ways is the discharge of ballast water. So when I give this presentation live, I always ask people what their definition of ballast is. Back in the day, it used to be things like coal and bricks. Now it is water. So the ship takes on water so that it is trimmed, so not too high, not too low, and then the ballast water is discharged at certain times, depending on how much cargo is put into the ship. So this is the number one source right around the world, and thousands of species around the world are estimated to be transported globally in ballast water. It can include everything and all life stages, so from adults to juveniles to eggs, cysts, larvae, etc., and all kinds of groups: crustaceans, worms, fishes, lots of different species. And the number one receiving area is ports. And there's some other examples there of slipways and breakwaters, etc. On the ship, I've put here that DAF, so that's the Commonwealth Department, has a marine biosecurity a compliance and assurance team. So they're currently undertaking surveillance around Australia for compliance with ballast water discharge, because there are national requirements for ballast water discharge, and we'll talk a little bit about those now. Ships need to be installing a ballast water management system. So that could be fresh water, it could be UV treatment, could be chemical treatment, anything that enables the living organisms in the ballast to be destroyed before the ballast is discharged. So there's a little map here at the top. So the green areas are fine for ballast discharge. The red areas are protected areas of the coast, so no ballast water discharge. And this stripy red area of the Gulfs is considered to be a same risk area. So if water is taken up there, it may be discharged. But if a ship is coming in from overseas, it cannot discharge ballast into this area here. So we've had fairly strict ballast water requirements since the Biosecurity Act came in, and ships now need to keep a recording system of where they take water up, where they discharge it, and the treatment method that they use. So this is mandatory since September 2024. Alrighty, so that was number one, was ballast water. Number two, how do these marine pests get here? They stick to ships and they stick to boats, particularly the hulls, but there's a whole lot of other niche areas as well, such as sea chests, which is the area where the ballast water is taken in. There's an example of a very rich sea chest on the bottom right of the screen, which is absolutely packed with critters. Ships and boats, they need to be cleaned frequently, because if the ship or the boat is covered with organisms subtidally, that can be detrimental to the hydrodynamic performance. A lot of you who are involved with boats will know all about the issues with anti-fouling. There's lots of different ways of doing that. PIRSA has recently developed in-water cleaning guidelines for South Australia, so that's particularly for ships and boats that are in the water. Here's an example. This is a yacht at Glenelg here, looking very hairy with lots of different invertebrates and seaweeds on. So lots of different surfaces can end up being fouled. There are lots of different ways now that you can treat this. High pressure water hose cleaning is commonly used now for smaller vessels because it's not as noxious as some of the chemicals that were used in the past, such as TBT. Righty-o, so how do hitchhikers spread? So once they come into ports and harbours, boats move in and out of the harbours, and they can also help to spread the introduced species around South Australia. And that's actually happened here with some of our port areas. So some of the introductions have come in to transport ports, or also sometimes shipping ports, and they have expanded from there. So sometimes they can do that naturally, just through tides and currents coming in and out of the harbour can move things around. But boats can also move introduced species around, and various activities as well. Aquaculture is a good example there. And but in terms of boats moving things around, all kinds of boats. So it's not restricted to any particular one. So there's some examples of all the boats here. Because introduced species can be attached to the hulls or the keel, ropes, bilge tanks, anchor wheel, all kinds of environments in the boat. All right, so after that very long introduction about hitchhikers, I wanted to talk a little bit about our project. So the aim is to learn more about the distribution and habitats of introduced species around South Australia, and also cryptogenic species, which basically means those that are often globally distributed and it's not actually known where they originated because they are so widespread. So starting place is not known. So as Alfie mentioned at the beginning, this is an extension of a project, a small project we started on York Peninsula and ran for a couple of years. We also did something similar on the Onkaparinga coast, and we now have current projects in the Green Adelaide region and also on Eyre Peninsula. A lot of this is voluntary as well. We are very fortunate to be assisted by small grants, which has enabled some of the field work, particularly field work that has been concentrated over a 6-day period with multiple people in the water and boat hire, etc. And it's also enabled us to pay the community to upload photos to our projects, which we'll talk about in a minute. So we're aiming for opportunistic photos to come in from community when you're out and about, whether you are diving or fishing, boating, beach combing. Everyone can contribute in this way. We also have field work periodically, which includes subtitle video transects, time searches, specimen collection, and we'll talk a little bit about the taxonomy later. Normally I ask people who uses iNaturalist, and we get a few hands up. I know that some people who are tuning in tonight do use iNaturalist, and I'm very glad that you do, because it's a very useful global portal for uploading photos, and it can be used for very many purposes. It is really useful as for marine education and terrestrial education, for learning about what lives in your local environment or any particular area that you're interested in, because it's linked with Google Maps. And you can also share information with other people. So for the past year and a half, some of the things we've been doing for this project, we've had 15 slideshows so far in 10 locations, particularly dive clubs and community groups, and we've done some Science in the Pub events, and we're aiming more outreach to fishing groups this year. There's an example of some of the posters down the bottom there. We've got some posters created last year with some of our hit list species, and they will be going into a book that will be freely available as a download. So we're asking people when they're out and about to take photographs of anything from the hit list, and you can find some examples of species we're interested in on our project pages on iNaturalist, Marine Hitchhikers of Eyre Peninsula and Marine Hitchhikers of the Green Adelaide region. And your records will automatically be picked up by our project pages, and we have some community grant funds to pay people for uploading to the project, and that is very helpful when people are out and about photographing things that they might not have seen before. So we're going to have a little chat in a minute about some of those things, but I quickly wanted to say, because people ask me sometimes in presentations, why is the community doing this project? And that is a good question, because as some people might be aware, there is generally a lack of resources for people to go out into the marine environment and detect pests. So there's not a large amount of detection, monitoring or research in South Australia. The government agencies do what they can, certainly, and they are fully stretched as far as I'm aware with what they are doing. And it's our responsibility as users of the marine environment to be aware, to keep our eyes out. Don't have to worry about that chart at the bottom, but it's basically just showing all of the important roles of coastal, estuarine and marine environments. So basically the marine environment is essential to life, but in a more economic sense, there's the seafood industry as well to consider with marine hitchhikers, because that can be threatened by species coming from overseas. So I normally ask, what is this? And people say it's a sea star, and it is. Okay, so this is one that isn't here in South Australia yet, touch wood. We don't know when it will arrive. We've been keeping an eye out for over 20 years now. Fortunately, there are no records. It came originally, I think, in the 1980s in wood chipping ships in Triabunna on the east coast of Tasmania. And since that time, it has spread all over parts of Tasmania and in Victoria as well. So there are sometimes hundreds and thousands of these particular sea stars in the waters of Victoria. They had a clean-up last year, I think at Mount Martha. There were hundreds of thousands of them. They are really an aggressive predator, particularly shellfish, and eats many other species as well. So if you do see this kind of sea star, so it's a pale yellow colour with purple on the edge. So they can either be yellow with purple or purple with yellow, depending on the age of the sea star. They have a fairly grainy surface. If you see something like that, please report it to PIRSA, because this is nationally declared species. It is public enemy #1 as far as invasive species go in southern Australia. I wanted to give an example of something that actually is here. So this has been here for decades. This is the Mediterranean sandworm. Those of you who hang around marinas probably would notice. So we describe this one as it's in many parts of South Australia. It is very prolific. And it survives in lots of different habitats. So we've, as part of this project, we've been given 600 videos from government agencies. We were very fortunate to get some examples of those, and I've employed a student to check through those and pick out the fanworms and other introduced species, because they are not confined to ports and marinas now. They are growing in all kinds of environments. Here's an example on the right here of one I photographed recently in Zostra seagrass. I've seen them growing in seaweeds. Here's a picture here growing out of an old mussel shell. It is very adaptable species. So it started in the Mediterranean, hence the name Mediterranean fanworm or European fanworm. It is now strongly established here. It is very prolific breeder and survives in a range of temperatures from 2 degrees up to about 30. This is an example taken by my colleague Steve Saville. This is an old tuna boat off Port Lincoln here. On the bottom you can see that it's pretty well completely covered in fanworms, and this is one from Brighton Jetty. Back in the day, Reef Watch used to have fanworm picking dives, but that doesn't occur anymore. Yeah, just a little bit of a fun fact about fanworms. So all of these fanworms start off as male and then they turn female. The females can produce about 50,000 eggs per batch, so quite fecund. They can compete with native winter feeders on the seafloor for food and for space. Not a lot of work done on fanworms, particularly here in South Australia, but they can impact nutrient cycling, and if they're really thick, they can impact mussel and oyster beds as well. Some of you would have seen this one, European green crab, which is also here in South Australia, particularly the metro area. You can see records all the way down the coast there. And this is another one that is not fussy about the habitat it lives in. It can live all over the place in many different environments. I've got some example here, both soft bottom and hard bottom environments. And like a lot of other pests, it can survive multiple different temperatures, salinity and oxygen level. All of these things on the right hand side of the screen, they are all European green crabs. So very variable in appearance and often quite well camouflaged as well. Quite a small crab, only about 5 to 7 centimetres, can grow to about 9 there. It's often a greeny colour, so if you look for a crab that's broad at the top, narrow at the bottom, and it's got 5 spines on the side of each eye, that is quite likely to be a European green crab. So PIRSA doesn't need records from the Gulf area here, from the local metropolitan area, but if you do, because it's well established here, but if you find it over on Eyre Peninsula, that would be important to report. So I've been looking around the coast for the past 2 years since I moved over here to live, and I haven't found any green crabs. No one else I know has found any green crabs. So we're hoping that this one doesn't arrive on Eyre Peninsula. So I always like to include this slide with a picture by Warwick Moyse. Hello, Warwick, if you're there, showing our local crab, Osseus truncatus, eating a green crab. So there's Osseus keeping South Australia safe. Thank you, Osseus. The text here says that, like many other marine hitchhikers, green crabs are prolific breeders. So mature early, 200,000 eggs per brood, and they can spawn up to 9 months of the year. Renee Campbell, who now works for the Commonwealth Biosecurity, did a PhD on these and found that they are very, very prolific spawns. And they eat lots of different things, particularly mussels and oysters. So that's a good reason to not have them over in the oyster growing areas. And they even eat each other. So yes. And I've just got the fish watch number there. So if you do see this anywhere on Eyre Peninsula, in fact, even on York Peninsula, it would be worth reporting. I think this is declared a noxious species under the Fisheries Management Act, but it's also nationally listed as a pest, and it's internationally known as the ocean's least wanted. So it's in the top 4 there. There is a response manual as well for those who would like to read it. Okay, still on crabs. This one has been found in South Australia a few times. Not all records are publicised, but when fishers find this in crab pots or in other areas, they do report to PIRSA. It's one of the ones from China, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia that that is found here occasionally. It would have come in from ballast water, very likely. And unfortunately, it does need to be destroyed before it establishes here, because this particular one can carry white spot virus syndrome, which can affect not only our local crabs, but also prawns and lobsters as well. So it can be quite significant if it does establish here. It's a very aggressive species. It looks a little bit like a blue crab, but it has a lot of spines along the top here. It also, as you can see on this one at the top here, it also has spines on the claws. So you can see the spines on the claws there. An example is the introduction of this species to New Zealand. So it came in 2000. In only 2 years, it had completely spread through Auckland Harbour. So yeah, very successful in some of the areas where it is established. You might see some signs up on boat ramps around South Australia now to report Asian paddle crab, and it's got some pictures on the boat ramp signs as well that show you how to identify this particular crab. Okay, what is this? It's a mussel, and we have lots of different mussels in South Australia. This particular one is a very small one. So you can see by the little finger, the thumb here, that it's quite a small, shiny, zigzaggy mussel. This is called the Asian date mussel, native to Russia, China, Korea, and Japan. It has been recorded here in the Port Adelaide area. So you can see from the little map at the top with all the blue spots there that it has been recorded here and also in Victoria. But it tends to have boom and bust recruitments. So sometimes it is detected and sometimes it is not. and it lives in soft areas as well. And it can form these groups of mussels that are all attached together by threads. And this can compete, once it establishes on the seafloor, it can compete with other native mollusks and also with worms. Sadi's developed a molecular assay for testing, for DNA testing of this particular species, and they have periodic checks to see if it's come back to Port Adelaide. This is another mussel, going from the small mussels to the really big mussels, because this one grows to about 24 centimetres, which is huge for a mussel, average about 10 to 17. This one is from New Zealand, as you can see from the map there, all over New Zealand, not in South Australia. I found one on the fuel loading wharf at Whyalla, but it was a dead one. It was a shell, so I'm hoping that it came from bait that people might have been using, because sometimes kids fish on that jetty. I've had a look in the water. There are mussels growing, but they are not green mussel. So we have not found any live green mussels. There are occasional reports of the big black blue mytilus mussel that can sometimes look a bit brownish and look a bit like green mussel, but hasn't arrived here, or at least hasn't established here yet, as far as we know. And hopefully it won't, because this is another one that will compete with native mussels and it can transfer disease. There's also an Asian mussel, which is about similar size and looks very similar to this, but I have not put that one in here because we need to move on to other things. This is another one that's not here yet. You can see that it's from New Zealand, and it's also really hit Tasmania hard. So it's been in Tasmania for a really long time. About 80 years ago, might have come with oyster shipments. This is another soft bottom species that lives in sand and mud and gravel. Haven't seen it here in South Australia yet, but look out for it. So it's a cone-shaped shell, but it's smooth. On the right here, there's an example of our native screw shell, which actually does look like a screw because it's got these ridges, ridged whorls all along the shell, and it's also a bit narrower and a bit smaller than the screw shell. So the screw shell is kind of mauvey, pink, pale, buff colour, quite smooth, and it's longer, from 6 to 9 centimetres. So this thing, once it does establish, which is what it's done in Tasmania and parts of Victoria, can significantly alter the seafloor habitat, because the shells breed up and then they die, and those that are living spread poo everywhere. Yeah, it can end up carpeting bays and channels, etc. So not one that we want here in South Australia. So if you do see something like that, please take a photograph, upload to iNaturalist, and also send your photo to the app, to the rec fishing app, which I will talk about a bit later, or report to Fishwatch. Hopefully, if you do find something that looks like this, it will be our native screw shell and not the New Zealand one. Okay. We're about halfway through now, but we're still on the shells. And the reason I included this, because this is quite a recent introduction to South Australia. So it was found in about 2020. There's a researcher at UniSA who did some work on this, and there's also a record from an iNat user from 2020. And I've put the map there. From 2020 to 2022, very few records. But recently, in the past few years, we've found more and more and more, and people have started finding it down at Christie's Beach and all the way down near Aldinga. And whether that's because more people are looking, or whether it's actually expanding its range from the Port River Barker Inlet system and outer harbour, it's not known. There isn't a lot of work done on this particular species, but because it's a hard water, a hard surface scallop, there is concern that it can compete with doughboy scallop because it occupies similar habitats. But also in Western Australia, it's become really abundant in some areas, and it can also settle on oyster restoration reefs. So it looks a little bit like our native doughboy scallop. Here's a picture from Warwick Moist down here, very nice picture of the native one. And at the top, Mike Burrell's picture of this livid fan scallop from Queensland and New South Wales. So one side, it looks very much like a doughboy because it's got a similar number of ridges, but on the other side, it only has 11 ridges with these little spines on. So if you see a scallop that looks like that, please record it and take a picture and upload it to iNaturalist as well. So these are some examples. I've been photographing it at various areas in the north, in North Arm, Taparoo, West Lakes, Port Adelaide area, etc. You can see that it's quite variable inside. So if you can get a picture, if it's a live scallop, it's always good to get a picture of the inside because that can help to identify it as well. It's often really hard to identify because it's covered with sponge. Here's examples here that are covered with sponge. These ones are completely invested with all kinds of things. So if they didn't have the gate open, they would be really hard to even see in the water. Matt Tank took a picture recently at O'Sully's Boat Harbour, I think in 2024. That is a concern because it's quite likely to have expanded to that area. It wasn't noticed there before in the past, but because there's reef next to the boat harbour, there is a concern that it might end up on the reef. Yes, certainly one that needs to be reported if you find it. I wanted to include this one too, the Shark Bay pearl oyster. So this is one that's been in South Australia for quite a long time, first documented in the 1980s. We don't know if it's been here longer than that. First recorded right up the top of Spencer Gulf. And a survey by Sardi in about 2010 found it mainly in the intertidal down to about 2 metres and on the edges of channels. As part of our York Peninsula Marine Hitchhikers project, we found it about 200 k's south of there at Port Hughes, and it's possibly spreading further south in Spencer Gulf. There is a PhD project from UniSA, which is now part of Adelaide University, started in 2023 to look at the impacts on razorfish of these particular pearl oysters because they are very common now in northern Spencer Gulf. They come from Western Australia, and as you can see from the map up the top here, they're also in Northern Territory, also in Queensland, so survive very well in the tropics. And whether they end up in Gulf St Vincent or not in the future, we don't know, but they're certainly over here. Fishers have said that they have a boom and bust type of life cycle. Sometimes they see very many of them attached to ropes or other hard surfaces, and in seagrass beds as well, even attached to other shells. And then sometimes the population dies down. But over the period, they have changed in abundance. So we really need more observations by fishers and boaties and yachties, particularly in southern Eyre Peninsula. Alrighty, what is this? This thing that looks like a French pastry is a seaweed. And some of you would have heard of wakame. It is an edible seaweed, and it started off here when it came from Japan in Tasmania in the 1980s. And like a lot of things that start in, well, a few things that start in Tasmania in the 80s, they end up spreading to Victoria, and often from Port Phillip Bay, they end up spreading here due to shipping connections and other reasons. So it's been reported, it's been known to occur here since about at least 2019, so that was the first photo record, but it wasn't actually reported at the time. And Fiona McQueen, who was volunteer at the herbarium, doing honors degree now, collected one from Roe Marina in 2023, and that was confirmed. So it does occur in the southeast. We're looking out for it in other parts of South Australia and haven't found it in other areas yet. But this is a very, very fast growing kelp, and it can dominate built structures, and it can spread to native reefs as well. So it actually looks a little bit like our Eclonia radiata, like our golden kelp, but you need to look for the midrib. So midrib is in the middle there, and this can grow really fast. It can grow more than 1 centimetre a day. So if you sit there and watch it, you'll probably see it growing. And it can reach about 2 metres long. So there's a tiny, tiny little phase, a gametophyte phase, and there's also a sporophyll phase. So it's a 2-phase life cycle, and it has these things, these little ruffle structures at the bottom that can produce very many spores. So 100 million spores from there. The problem is, once this establishes, it can exclude native kelp, and it can form dense forests that compete for space and light and exclude native species. It can also compete for settlement space in oyster farms. So this is another one that's listed as an Australian priority marine pest. I won't talk too much about aquarium caulerpa because we might run out of time, other than to say this is a national pest. A lot of work has been done on this. It's been here since 2002. All the initial concerns of it spreading throughout the Gulf hasn't eventuated, fortunately, but this globally is a very significant pest. So if you do find this, please don't return it to the water if found. And fortunately, it still seems to be confined to the port area there. It is a very invasive species. We do have other green algae here. So this is one called Dead Man's Fingers, which is in South Australia and apparently is spreading. So started in Japan, but now globally distributed, first being recorded in West Lakes in 2002, but it's now spread much further. So we have community records from about 20 different locations now, as well as marinas and wharfs and jetties where it's often found. Unfortunately, it can exist on native reefs as well, and it's one of the 4 most significant invasive seaweeds in the world. So when kelp cover declines in some areas, this codium can take over the space, and it can actually inhibit the recruitment of new kelp spores. So it is quite competitive and can monopolise space. So it is a problem. So here are some examples here. So this is from Marina Structure up at North Haven Marina. This is from Christie's Beach, where it is living on the reef there. We do need a sample from Christie's Beach, which is the northern part of the Encounter Marine Park, sorry, not Encounter Bay. Because genetic work needs to be done to see if this one that is actually on the reef there is fragile and not something else. Here's some examples. Here's another example here from O'Sullivan's Beach. So there's a few different green spaghetti-like branched codiums in South Australia. This particular one has hairs along the edge. I don't know if you can see that in the right-hand picture. There's these very, very fine hairs sticking out of the branches. And I think it is important to have samples. I mentioned this because there are similar species in South Australia. So we've got Codium spinescens from WA. We've got the Japanese one, Fragile, subspecies Fragile, and we've also got Codium Fragile Nova Zelandii. So if there are any impacts from spinescens or Nova Zelandii, we don't know about them yet, but we do know that this dead man's fingers is a particular problem. This is a sample that I sent to the herbarium in 2024, and Catherine McMahon from Friends of Port River has delivered one yesterday because more material is needed for genetic work. It's really hard to identify this by sight. So thank you, Catherine, for delivering that and for getting another sample from North Haven. So Tracy Spokes from the herbarium is doing some work on this species for the Marine Hitchhikers project and also identifying the other similar codiums as well. Thank you, Tracy. Very quickly about dead man's fingers, one of the 4 most significant invasive seaweeds in the world. So that is actually quite a concern that it's living here in South Australia. And it was previously limited to boat harbours and marinas and jetties, but as I said, now it is on reefs. We also have a number of other algae, and those of you who are divers would see this because Asparagopsis taxiformis is growing very, very well in South Australia. There's quite a lot of this red, feathery looking algae around the world, and the invasive lineage and other lineages are present in Australia. So some work was done on this, some genetic work, but no records from South Australia, and that's often the case. When genetic studies are done, they do not include South Australian material. So we are making sure that changes as part of this project. So you can see globally, very common throughout the tropics, and it's in various parts of Australia. This is the same one that is grown here as a methane reducing food supplement for cattle. So there's a number of different aquaculture facilities that grow Asparagopsis now. Grows very well here. And there's also a few other algae that have been identified here, introduced species. There's Devil's Tongue here, which started in the southeast, but now it's here in the metropolitan waters as well. This other one, Guadalupia subpectinata, is in a number of different locations, and there's a few other species as well. So a big shout out to the herbarium here, who've done a wonderful job with the samples that we are providing. They are an integral partners in this project, and we are very grateful to all the work that people have done there. Right. So I wanted to include this one as well because even though it looks like a seaweed, and in fact this particular sample from here was sent to the herbarium by someone who found it back in 2020, I think in far northern Spencer Gulf, and it was thought that it was a seaweed because it was actually covered in fine red algae. But it's a sponge, and we know very little about this sponge. And I'll just show you a video that I took at Port Broughton. It looks like it's not going to work. It's really unfortunate because it's actually quite a nice video. Never mind, it might. It's like it's all stretched out. So this particular one is in northern Spencer Gulf, and it's also at Port Broughton. There's a possibility that it's in Port Adelaide as well. And it seemed to be growing prolifically on hard structures, and it actually wasn't at Port Broughton back in the day, about 20 years ago, but now it's one of the most dominant invertebrates in dominant habitat forming species in the area. And when it all sloughs off from under the structures, it ends up down on the seafloor like big piles of spaghetti. Here. I took a crummy little sample into South Australian Museum, and Shirley Sorokin had a look and confirmed that it is a calcareous sponge. It has 2 kinds of spicules in it, 2 distinctive shaped spicules. We don't know much about this species or what impacts it might have. We do know that it seems to be growing in areas that have some kind of freshwater input. there's something in America that looks very similar. There are two possible genera that might be. One of them is called aquarium sponge because it's a pest, and it came from aquariums originally, or it was grown in aquariums. So lots unknown about this. But if you see it, please take a photo and upload to iNaturalist, and we'll find out where it was. So make sure you mark the location, and we can go and get a sample from other areas as well. Alrighty, we're nearly finished now. This is an ascidian. So this particular thing is a sea squirt. So it's basically lots of little zooids, little animals all living together in a gelatinous type of mass called a test. And there are many, many different kinds of native sea squirts in South Australia, but this particular one from Northwest Pacific, possibly Japan, this is a concern because it's what is known as an overgrowing species. So basically any hard surface it can grow on. So it can grow on shellfish, rock, gravel, can even grow on sponges, other ascidians, and it can smother environments. It's a very fast grower, and it can also foul vessels and equipment. Not many animals eat it because it's got little sharp spicules in it. It was first detected in 2021 in Garden Island in WA, so fairly recently, and Sydney Harbour in 2023. So WA, they tried to control that. Moving the colonies, it's actually been unsuccessful. This is a national pest, Didymnum vexillum, and there's another one very similar called Didymnum pellucidum, which is also now spread globally. You can see from the map here that it's in the tropical states and right through almost to the GAB, not here yet as far as we know. So tests are done every now and then, and samples are given to SARDI, and they are developing assays to test for these species as well. So similar to the sea vomit, this one, pellucidum, can also live on mussels, barnacles, tube worms, pontoons, harbour structures, all over the place. It can actually smother seagrass as well, which is a concern. And mussels, oysters, this one has been established since about 2010 in ports and marinas, but unfortunately it's now spreading up the coast. It's also in Northern Territory and Queensland. This one is quite easy to detect with molecular methods. So if it does arrive in South Australia, one would hope that it can be detected at the source if it is a marina or a port, and controlled before it does spread. There is an eradication and control methods manual at the moment. So once it's established, unfortunately, it's really hard to eradicate. All right, nearly finished now. I wanted to include the fishes, and this is for you, Dan Monceau, because I gave this presentation not long ago and I didn't include fishes. I don't actually have a permit to collect fishes for this project, which is interesting because if you're a fisher, you can go out and catch a fish. But if you want to catch a fish for research, you need a number of different permits. Okay, so we've got a few here. The trident goby, the crested oyster goby, the yellowfin goby, which is classified as a noxious pest in New South Wales, and its exquisite sand goby. First detected here, this one, the exquisite sand goby in 2019 by Dan in the Port River, I think it was Garden Island area, and it actually took a few years before that was identified. And then Brad Martin found it in their sample area for an oyster project and brought one to the museum, and it was identified as exquisite sand goby by Ralph Foster. There's not a lot of work done here on these gobies or the impacts that they have. In fact, I don't think there's any work done on the introduced species in South Australia, although Mike Hammer has done some genetic work back in the day. The yellowfin is a concern because it's in New South Wales, it's moved into the estuarine areas there. It's living very happily here. This is Ryan Otten's picture from West Lakes in 2019, and I go to West Lakes about every 8 weeks or so, and it's all over the shop there. So yeah, growing very, very prolifically in West Lakes, but haven't found it in other areas yet. And same with these gobies. The other gobies, they tend to be confined to the Port River Barker Inlet system. Whether they're in Onkaparinga and other estuarine areas, some of these, we don't know. I would hope some more sampling will be occurring, and I think there might be through some government work in Onkaparinga. And speaking of samples, it's very important as part of this project is collecting samples and having them identified professionally, because sometimes you just can't determine what something is by looking at it. You can quite easily with fishes, but with invertebrates, and particularly things like sponges, ascidians, bryozoans, very, very difficult to tell what they are without microscopic examination. So I would like to say thank you to all the people on this slide here, because as part of this project, there are people collecting samples, and we are sending them off to taxonomists, both interstate and overseas, ensure that we adhere to all the specifications for transferring specimens as well, so with customs, etc. And here's an example from a field trip that we had recently in Spencer Gulf, so from Tumby Bay southwards to several areas in Boston Bay, Louth Bay, and also Coffin Bay. And I sent the bryozoans over to New Zealand, and these came back, these SEM pictures from Dr. Gordon, who has identified them for us, which is really helpful. So all of them are either, one of them is a first record for Australia, one of the Louth Bay ones, and these three are first records for South Australia. The significance of that, I don't know. We don't know what, we don't know enough about these bryozoans or the distribution to know if there are any impacts of their presence here. But so many of the bryozoans that are not found in South Australia that until recently is probably because people haven't looked in recent years. There were a number of people working on bryozoans here in the past, and they aren't anymore. Okay, so I mentioned we had a field trip. That's another important part of the Eyre Peninsula project, because there have been very few field trips over the years. The last one before ours, I think, was Flinders Uni, quite a few years before that. And a big shout out to Audrey Falconer and Leon Altoff from Marine Research Group, which is a volunteer group associated with the Field Nuts of Victoria, a group of very skilled people, taxonomists and photographers and field people. We had a field trip that was very intense. We worked 16 to 18 hours days over 6 days and covered a lot of area. So I'd like to thank all these people on the screen here as well for their contribution to that work. More and more information is coming back from that field trip all the time. So sometimes it takes months to get results back from samples that have been collected, but that is actively being identified, all of the material from that survey, and that's going into a report for national parks about what we've found and also what we've found from opportunistic sampling right across eastern and southern Spencer Gulf over the past 2 years. Okay, that's the finish of the information about some of the species. There are very many more species apart from the ones that I've included, but that's just a sample of some of the things of the more than 100 introduced species that are here in South Australia. So normally, if I could see people, I would ask you who has an iNaturalist account. And if you don't, I would strongly advise, if you are interested in marine pests, or if you're interested in the marine and coastal environment, or in fact, you're interested in nature in general, I would recommend getting an account. It's free to join, takes about 2 minutes. There's a phone app. There's also a website here where you can sign up. Very easy to join. You just need a username and a password. There's the www.iNaturalist.org. So this is international. It's a huge citizen science repository. There are nodes in very many countries, including Australia. And there are many people in Australia using this particular program, particularly in South Australia as well. We have a lot of coastal and marine user groups, and there's a lot of projects. So if you want to know a bit about what is living in your area, you can find out on iNaturalist, because it's linked to Google Maps and you can do a search of your area. Or if you're interested in a particular group, you might be interested in bugs or frogs or trees or birds, anything like that, you can do a search. And if you have a specific species that you want to find out about, say liver fan scallop, you can also do a search right down to species level as well. And that will give you a map of all the records that have been found. So I wanted to mention that observations, even from a small geographical area, and in this case for the Marine Hitchhikers project, such as a marina or a harbour, can result in new information about species presence and relative abundance and range expansion. So when we started this project, there was hardly anything in the Padawalanga and Glenelg Marina, but a couple of us, particularly Matt Tank and myself, have been to the marina and reporting lots of different species here. There are some areas that there are very few records. Interestingly, very few from North Haven Outer Harbour area outside of the marina, and also in the Henley and Grange area there as well. So say you are out in the environment, you take a picture on your phone, or in this case, if you take an underwater picture with a camera, where you can take your camera out on the beach or to a rock pool or whatever, and you've taken some photos, you're not sure what something is, you can go into iNaturalist and there's a little green upload button there after you've made an account, of course. So you need to have an account to upload, and you can either upload directly from your phone, or you can choose a file if you're on the web version. So this example is the web version. This is my account, Marine Janine. So I've got my files here on my computer. I'm looking for something to upload. There is a picture. So I press choose files. And I would like to have this as a live demonstration, but considering the issues we had just getting this presentation up, I'm sorry that it's all static, but never mind. Okay, so after you've uploaded your photos, there will be, just show that, on this left side of the screen here, there's location. So if you click location, you can either choose a location if it's already in the database, and there are, I don't know how many locations in the database, but globally it's probably in the millions or at least hundreds of thousands. So say my record was from Cow, I could type in Cow, but we need to be careful that it is Cow in South Australia, the Franklin Harbour, and it's not Cow Beach in California, for example. So you need to know the location where you are. That's really helpful when you're trying to pin your location. If you look for your location where your photo came from and it's not in the list, you can actually pin your own. So you can go to the box and then, you can go to Google Maps and press, oops, didn't mean to press that, get back there. Okay, so you can go zoom in on Google Maps, you find your location. This is the Franklin Harbour Cow Marina. This is where my picture was taken. So then I can press that and then it'll ask you if you want to name your location. So you name it. Sorry about this. Let's go back there. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so you can zoom in to the location and you can pin that, and then that will be added to the database. The other option you have is geo-privacy here, which will be open by default, which means anyone can find that particular location where you've pinned your photo. If it's a protected species, something that's listed under the IUCN Red List, it will automatically be obscured. So when people look for the location of that particular species record that you have uploaded, it won't be exactly georeferenced. It might be a couple of kilometres out, for example. The other option you have is private. If you want to pinpoint exactly, but you don't want people to know where that was. So that is important for particular projects where the privacy of the data is important. And you can trust particular users with the geo-referencing for that, so that they have access to that exact location. So when you're uploading, you've added I'm actually missed this page because I think it's two slides. So I went straight to location, but you can also put your species name here when you upload your photo. If you're not sure what it is, that's okay. You don't have to know what species you've found, but be careful of the auto-suggested IDs. I've been on iNaturalist since 2018 and I've noticed that the AI function is improving a lot over time because it learns where particular species are likely to be. Before, it was based very much on visual similarity. So, for example, this Ascidian, which is a flower shape, a few years ago, this might have automatically come up as a flower. Whereas now, the algorithm is much more developed, but still be careful of auto-suggested ID. If you don't know what it is, you can just put nothing. You can put something, or just life, for example, because there's a huge community of people in iNaturalist who can help you with ID. We try to get as many professional taxonomists onto this site as possible to improve the quality of the data, because iNaturalist data is now imported into global databases of biodiversity, and it's also imported into the Atlas of Living Australia, where it sits alongside museum quality data of specimens that have been professionally identified. So it is very important that we try and keep the IDs as accurate as possible in iNat. So if you're not sure what it is, that is okay. It will go through a process where a number of people will have a look at this, but because it is a community ID, it's always worth checking as well if it's something that's not easy to determine. Okay, we went through location. We did it first instead of second. Okay, so now we've got our species ID. In this case, I think it was a Botrytis tunicate, so I put that in. I put my location, which was Cow Marina, and then I pressed the button, submit one observation. So then it will go into your own collection, as well as being available when people people search for sea squirts, or they might search for botrytis, or they might even search for cow. So it will come up under all of those searches when people can search the iNaturalist. So there's a number of search functions in there, and you can bound particular areas as well if you want to search at any particular scale. So that's a short introduction to iNaturalist. There are very, very many functions, but I have a feeling we are running out of time. We've actually run over time, I've just noticed, and I apologise for that. If you're uploading to iNaturalist, that's a good thing, because it will go into Atlas of Living Australia, and PIRSA has set an alert so that anything introduced comes from ALA straight to them every however often week, so that they can keep track of what community is uploading. There's also the PIRSA recreational fishing app. It only has about 13 marine species in at the moment, but it's got some of the biggies. So, for example, the paddle crab, the green mussel, the screw shell, some of the nationally declared pests that we talked about earlier are in that app. So that's something that you can get on your phone, and it can be used to log some of the known pests that already occur here, or some that might arrive here. But probably the number one thing would be to ring Fishwatch. So Fishwatch number, you can find it quite easily with a Google search. It's a 1-800 number. I think that's very important to do. Okay, so the summary is there are hundreds of introduced species in Australia, and there are over 100 here in South Australia. The more we look, the more we find. And we know that with the changing environment, more will establish over time. We're particularly getting more East Coast species here from Queensland and New South Wales that are establishing. And as we get increased vessel traffic and human activity in the water, etc., more will arrive from all of those reasons. So really, we've just scratched the surface in documenting what is found here. It is really important to try and detect things at the source if they are new introductions, because then we stand a better chance of protecting South Australian marine environment from the expansion of introduced species. We also need more people and more methods. We're starting through this Marine Hitchhikers project, and there's also people doing some work at university and people doing work in government agencies. It's not a field of great interest to many people, which is quite surprising considering how significant it is for the biosecurity of South Australian waters. So my final take-home message would be more eyes in the water, because protection of the South Australian marine environment is up to all of us, and everyone can meaningfully contribute, whether they're swimming, snorkelling, fishing, rock pooling, beach walking, etc. We all have a role to play. Okay, as well as all the taxonomists that I included in the other slide, I also wanted to say thank you to all of these people here who've been involved in either the Green Adelaide project or the Eyre Peninsula project, and a particular shout out to my colleague Matt Tank, very avid iNaturalist contributor, and he's worked on these projects for with me since 2020. So something has happened now. I'm going to stop sharing.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Janine. That was incredible. That was an incredible amount of information. And yeah, thank you.
Maybe overload, I'm not sure.
No, it's great. It's great to know the specifics and know what to, like, how to identify these species, because, you know, they can really vary, and you need to really know that key thing to look for, like the 5 spines on the crab, or
yeah. And I'll send through the I think I sent through some of the posters that give an example. Another good way of identifying things would be to go onto iNaturalist and then have a look through the project pages. So just click species and a list of all the species will come up. Then you can click and see a dozen different records. for example.
We had a question come through from Joe Hendricks, who asks, should you remove them if you see them, or just record and take photos? And did you say alert PERSA? But I'm not sure which specific species was you talking about when she asked that.
I think the best thing is to call PERSA on a 1-800 number, because they've asked that if they are attached species that you don't remove them, because if they are in a reproductive phase, that could possibly spread it as well. But if you do accidentally pick up a crab in your crab pot, for example, and you think, oh, this might not be one of the local crabs, they ask that you not put it back in the water if you are sure that it might be an Asian paddle crab, for example, and particularly with the noxious seaweeds as well. If you find one of those, don't put it back in the water. But it's important that that people learn more about what is out there, and I'm hoping to get the booklet out as soon as possible as well, because that will help people to learn more about what's in their area. But at least the first cut, if people can have a look at the project pages in Naturalist, because that contains about 60 different species that people are likely to see, and I'll also try and provide the posters more widely as well. I think it would be nice to have an online repository for those, so you're welcome to
yeah, we can pop them up on our site.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you.
We've just had another question from Adele saying, how do we collect and where do we deliver samples of the dead man's fingers?
Okay, so that's something that I will contact Adele about, because if it's in a marine park, we actually need a permit to do that. So I'll write that down and I will contact Adele about that. So if they're best delivered fresh to the herbarium. So if you do get a sample and it's outside of a protected area, you could deliver it to the herbarium. You're actually meant to have a permit to do that. So for the past couple of years of the project, I've had a PERSA intertidal permit, so available, permissible to collect between 0 and 2 metres. There's also a number of other permits through DEW. And I think once the Biosecurity Act comes through here in South Australia, there will be a one-stop shop for permits, which will be really helpful, because at the moment there's about 3 or 4 different permits that are needed to collect. But getting back to Adele's question, Adele, if you do collect outside of a sanctuary zone, and I know you're from the university, so you would have a permit there, you could send it, deliver it straight to the herbarium. So keep it in seawater, don't put it in anything else, and deliver it fresh. That would be really helpful. But you do need to ring the herbarium first to make sure that Carolyn or Tracy is there to receive it. And I see one from Catherine Lewis here. Are you looking only at the Adelaide area? So at the moment, our focus area is from Port Gawler in the north down to Sellex Beach in the south. So that's the Green Adelaide region. And we've also got a project on Eyre Peninsula from Port Augusta in the north down to Coffin Bay in the south. Depending on how these projects go, we will hope to expand over to the Eastern GAB and possibly the Fleurieu area in future as well, and maybe go back to York Peninsula, because it's been quite a long time since we've worked over there. I think the last survey we did was in about 2016. But at the moment, our focus is Metro Waters, and that's where we've got funding for at the moment from Green Adelaide to pay when people upload to iNaturalist. And we do have a number of people out collecting samples as well who have permits to do that as well.
Just wanted to mention there was Cara who raised her hand for a minute before. I'm not sure if she had a question, but yeah, if you want to pop it in the chat box, or yeah, maybe need to be unmuted.
Sorry, my screen has just disappeared. It says it's
Oh.
initialising an update.
We can see you still at this stage.
Okay.
Hopefully you don't disappear. We've got tech support.
Okay, I'll just check what the hand raise was. Oh, thank you.
We had another question from Adele asking, I lost it. And the long-spined urchins, are they now migrating from the East Coast? Can we just take them, or is this under a permit now too?
Long-spined urchins. There is a long-spined urchin from Western Australia that is here. That South Australia is the edge of the range for the Western long-spined urchin. If the eastern one, Centra Stephanus, is over here, that would need to be reported to PIRSA as well. So I'm sure that if it is, that you would need to get a sample, but you would need approval. So if you ring the PIRSA, the Fish Watch line, they will put you onto the duty officer, which is the fisheries officer in that particular area where you are seeing this urchin, and you may be able to collect as an agent for PIRSA if they can't get to the area. So sometimes that is the case because there's a vast area for the fisheries officers to cover. I also wanted to ask the person who's found long-spined sea urchin where that is, where you have recorded that here.
That was Adele. Wait to see
There's one.
I had it. Oh, I'll go ahead, Janet.
There's one more question by Susan.
I think that one, Janice, we won't touch on tonight just because we've already run out of time. Someone asked about the Gulwa algae situation, Janine, and yes, there's a community forum coming up next Thursday in Middleton to discuss it, but Janine and I have also been talking about maybe having another session to address that online.
I think that would be good, and with Ozfish as well, because we're hoping that people will keep uploading wash-ups, because that gives us a really good indication of what is washing up where, and the spread of the bloom geographically and over time, because there's a number of toxic algae that are active in South Australian waters at the moment, not just the Mickey Mo toy. And it does seem to be spreading west. I'm going to have a look tomorrow actually down south, and I know there's some people doing work over here at the moment, fortunately, in Coffin Bay and Boston Bay as well. So yes, I think it would be really good to have another forum, because there has been a lot of misinformation about it as well. I'm very glad that in the Middleton forum that Faith will be presenting, and also one of the surfers there, and local people as well. And it would be helpful here, because there's not enough information getting out to the public, and it is a very significant event, and it's a large scale and long-lived event at the moment. It's not finished, and with this warm, calm water that we're seeing over the next over this month, unseasonably warm, it may continue as well.
I have a couple more questions about the Marine Hitchhikers program. That's okay, just that I thought up. Do you have any survey? Do you go out on surveys, and can you volunteers join in on your trips?
Yes. So we are insured. We're insured as a community group. So you need to fill in a form though, and for specific surveys, mainly divers and beachcombers and students, etc., are doing this independently. We do have specific surveys, but not often, because surveys cost a lot of money to run. If you are interested in being involved in the project, just send some info, send a request, and then if we do have particular surveys coming up, I'll certainly let you know.
Yeah,
We
great.
also we also have a marina berth that I was hoping some students would do some projects, because that's available for projects, and it's at Outer Harbour where there are a lot of marine pests. So there's a lot of opportunity over the next 12 months for people to do specific projects on whatever species are growing there, if they want to work on growth or recruitment or seasonal change, for example. But we also ask people who are just doing their own thing in the water, if they're out swimming, diving, etc., it would be very helpful for people to be aware of some of the species that we're looking for, just in case they see them. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Chloe Williams, because Chloe runs cleanup dives through her group, Big Blue Crew, and that when marine debris is hauled up, it often has introduced species on it. So those kind of events are very helpful as well. So thank you, Brad and Leah, for helping with those events and taking samples too.
Another question, Janine. Do PERSA or Fishwatch monitor the iNaturalist observations?
More so now, I think, but originally they didn't. But because iNaturalist observations go to ALA, into the Atlas of Living Australia, they are auto-imported, and PERSA has an alert for anything introduced that goes into ALA. So there's two levels of checks. So there's those of us who identify through iNaturalist or through taxonomists, and we might not put the name in until we actually get the sample ID back from the taxonomist. So we'll keep it at a higher level, just say podium, for example, and we won't say that it is fragile until we absolutely know. So there's that. And then once the records go into Atlas of Living Australia, there are staff there who will also check. And if they're not certain, they won't include the record. So I've noticed that a number of records from South Australia that are based on photo only, they don't even occur in Atlas of Living Australia. So they've actually, they've imported the records, but they've not made them visible. So, and particularly if they're noxious species, I think they want to be sure through a sample before they do, before they include them in the atlas. But yes, PERSA does have access through that way, through Atlas of Living Australia. They have access to INAT records.
Great. It's looking like there's no more questions coming from the group, so we might leave it there for tonight.
Okay,
yeah.
Sorry,
Thank you, Janine. That's okay. This is so interesting. I feel like we could talk about this all night. But yeah, thank you for tonight, and thank you for all your efforts running this community citizen science project. And
welcome. Thank you for hosting.
Yeah, giving. It's so important to give the community a chance to get involved, and this is just such a fantastic way that people can, like, just on their day-to-day lives, can do something meaningful for science. So thank you.
I agree, because people can contribute wherever they go, whether it's their local area or whether they're going away on holiday somewhere. They might see something that they're not sure of, and that's been the case where people have uploaded things because they've come over just to South Australia for a visit, and they think, oh, I haven't seen that before, and they upload, and it just happens to be something that we're looking for. And that's the same. I'm going to put a plug in there for uploading dead things that you see on the beach, because it's actually really important. There have been some extraordinary wash-ups with this algal bloom, including rare species we had no idea even lived in that area, and also deep sea species are washing up as well, from 60 to 100 metres deep. So it's been, it's been really phenomenal what has been washing up, and that it's very helpful to know what is washing up. So at least, even though these animals have died, their deaths haven't been a complete waste, because they are contributing to science in that way. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, and to try and get something helpful out of a very, very sad situation.
Yeah, we've just seen Catherine said we had hundreds of Ascidians.
Island Beach, it's been terrible for Kangaroo Island, particularly the benthic species. Thank you, Catherine, for the information, and I'm hoping that you'll get photos of that if it's possible. Because when the algae die, and the algae is toxic, so it forms a thick soup when it blooms up in the water. It does contain toxins, at least the Mickey Motoi has about 5 different low-level toxins in, but the main problem is if it gets into the gills of fish and invertebrates, it causes an immune reaction. So it's a bit like when you when there's a pollutant in the air and your eyes water and your nose streams, etc. It's the same situation. So that can affect slow-moving animals that can't swim out of the bloom. But the other thing is when all the algal cells die and they sink to the bottom, that whole process uses up oxygen, and it also helps bacteria to grow. So anything living on the seafloor may basically suffocate, and that's what happened at a lot of places on northern Kangaroo Island there on northeast KI. So that's why possibly why they got so many dead rays and flatheads and those kind of species, buller shells, etc. That's really interesting about the Ascidians. So they may have taken up some of the toxic.
I don't think I can hear Janine at the moment.
Yeah, she's paused for. I thought I had just maximized my screen, so I thought it was me, but we might have lost her. Well, that's not a great way. I'll just maybe we'll end it there, unfortunately. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight. We will send the recording around automatically to everyone that registered, but also stay tuned for potentially another online forum to talk with Janine and other, like Brad and hopefully Faith and other local experts about the fish kill. Sorry Janine, we lost you for a while there, but we're just wrapping up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh, and there's another one here. I saw many dead fish and cuttlefish at Encounter Bay. Yes, it has been really serious for cuttlefish and octopus, and a number of slow-moving both reef and seagrass species as well. Encounter Bay has been one of the hardest hit areas, and that coast outside of Encounter Bay as well as Kangaroo Island. There are now reports from and York Peninsula as well. So it has expanded in recent weeks, and there's some very nervous people over here on Eyre Peninsula as well.
Yeah, which is understandable. It's coming your way.
Yes, it is, if not already. So we're asking people to keep a lookout over here as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again, Janine. And yeah,
thanks for fielding the chats as well. And
yeah, thank you, Janet.
Thank you to Port Environment Centre for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for tuning in this evening. Yeah, very happy that you're interested in this topic, because it's something that affects the marine environment, and we can all help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.
Thank you. Cheerio. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. I don't even know how to log out now.